There's a very specific feeling you get when you're looking at a puzzle and you've got two pieces that absolutely unequivocally belong together based on their shape.
Right, they fit perfectly.
Yeah, they fit physically, but the image printed on them just completely clashes. It's this total cognitive dissonance.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it breaks your brain a little bit.
It really does. And, when we usually do a deep dive into a country's global development data, for those of you listening who love this stuff, we sort of expect a certain level of, I guess, engineering consistency?
Yeah, like a predictable pattern.
Exactly. You look at a nation's infrastructure, you check out their poverty levels, and the statistics generally paint a pretty cohesive picture.
Right. I mean, you point to a developing economy and you can usually just say, well, there it is. There's the expected struggle.
It is oddly comforting in a way, isn't it?
It is. We really like our socioeconomic models to be linear. We want
Yeah.
them neatly categorized into these little conceptual boxes.
Right. Like if a country has poor infrastructure, we expect high poverty.
Exactly. And if they have great schools, we naturally expect high equality and booming economic growth. It just makes intuitive sense.
But then, and this is why we're here today, you step into the world of human development data for certain rapidly evolving nations, and suddenly that predictive machine we all rely on is just utterly broken.
Completely shattered.
Yeah.
What we are examining today is, well, it's the absolute definition of a structural paradox.
It really is. It's a set of data that defies basically every traditional rule of global development.
Yeah, and I think it's important to state up front that this isn't just a minor statistical anomaly. This is a massive, glaring contradiction.
Okay, so I want you, the listener, to picture something with me for a second. Just imagine a piece of paper sitting on a desk.
Okay.
Right in the middle of it is this massive number, the number 178.
Right.
And imagine it's circled in this thick, bright red ink, like a failing grade on a test. Now, right below that massive 178, in much smaller, quiet print, is the number 2.
And just to be completely clear here, statistically speaking, those two numbers are practically allergic to each other.
They really are.
In the realm of international development rankings, they should not exist on the same page, let alone describe the exact same country in the exact same year.
They really shouldn't. So let's unpack this for the listener. What exactly are we looking at here? That number 2 is a global rank, right?
Yes, represents the nation of Jordan. And it's their global ranking in something called the Multidimensional Poverty Index.
Or the MPI, as we'll probably call it.
Right, the MPI. And their score is 0.003, which means that for all intents and purposes, extreme systemic multidimensional poverty has been virtually eradicated.
Number 2 in the entire world.
Yeah, number 2, which is just a massive triumph of public policy and infrastructure. I mean, it's something most nations spend literally centuries trying to achieve.
Okay, but then you look up at that massive red-circled 178.
Right, the puzzle piece.
That is Jordan's global rank in the Gender Development Index, the GDI, for the year 2023. Out of 194 countries tracked by these metrics, they are sitting at 178.
Which means they are at the absolute rock bottom globally. I mean, they are sharing that statistical space with nations that are actively in the middle of severe, catastrophic civil conflicts.
Or total economic collapse.
Exactly.
So here's the central question, the mystery we're really asking you to ponder today as we do this deep dive. How can a country virtually eradicate multidimensional poverty, provide incredible access to basic human needs, yet sit at the very edge of the global rankings for gender equality?
It's such a profound question because it really requires us to completely dismantle our assumptions. Usually when a country has a GDI ranking in the 170s, it's accompanied by severe poverty.
Right, like they go hand in hand.
Exactly. You see a lack of access to clean water, failing educational infrastructure, sky-high mortality rates. The poverty and the gender inequality are deeply intertwined.
They feed off each other in this vicious cycle.
Right. But Jordan has somehow severed that link. They fixed the poverty. They built the schools. They saved the lives.
Yet the gender gap remains this massive, unbridgeable chasm.
Yes.
And you, the listener, you're the kind of person who loves looking past those surface-level headlines, which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We've got a massive stack of data in front of us.
It's a really comprehensive report.
Yeah, spanning over 3 decades, from 1990 all the way to 2023. It tracks basically every conceivable nuance of Jordan's human development.
Right, and our mission today is to unpack this structural imbalance. We really need to figure out why an entire demographic of highly qualified, highly educated individuals is well, collectively absent from the economy.
Yeah, and how this exact paradox is acting like this heavy anchor dragging down the nation's entire global standing.
Absolutely. Because to really grasp the weight of this paradox, we can't just look at a snapshot of today.
Right, we need the context.
Exactly. We have to look at the momentum. We have to understand the 30-year journey of Jordan's Human Development Index, the HDI.
Because if you just look at the historical trajectory, it looks like, well, one of the great success stories of the modern era.
It really does.
So guide us through that journey. What does the baseline actually look like back in 1990?
Okay, so the HDI, for anyone who might not track it daily, is essentially the United Nations ultimate scorecard for human progress.
It's the big one.
Right, it's the big one. It doesn't just look at money. It combines health, education, and standard of living into one single number between 0 and 1.
Okay, so where was Jordan in 1990?
In 1990, Jordan's HDI was 0.619.
Which puts them where, contextually speaking?
That placed them solidly in the medium human development category. So they were a developing nation with, significant room for improvement, but certainly not at the bottom of the barrel.
Right.
Now, you fast forward through 30 years of policy, investment, and huge cultural shifts to the year 2023. That score climbed to 0.754.
Which is a huge jump. I was looking at the growth chart before we started, and that is a solid 21.8% overall increase. Yep. And it's not a jagged line either. It's a very steady, determined climb upward.
Right, and the real significance of that 21.8% increase is that it pushed Jordan across a major developmental threshold.
They graduated, basically.
Exactly. They moved from a medium human development country into a high human development country.
Which is incredible. We are talking about millions of individual lives being fundamentally improved here, generations of families experiencing a completely different reality than their grandparents did.
It's a monumental achievement.
But, numbers on a chart can be a bit abstract. When a country's HDI jumps by nearly 22%, what is actually happening on the ground? What are the engines driving that specific growth?
Well, we can break that down by looking at the three core components of the HDI: health, education, and income.
Okay, let's start with health.
Let's do it because the health engine was absolutely roaring during this period. Life expectancy at birth in Jordan jumped from 70.1 years in 1990 to 77.8 years in 2023.
Wow, that is almost 8 extra years of life for the average citizen.
It's a massive leap.
How does a government even orchestrate a nearly 8-year leap in life expectancy in just 3 decades? Because, that can't just be from telling people to eat better and exercise.
No, definitely not. You don't get that kind of statistical leap without systemic nationwide public health overhauls.
Right.
It represents a massive expansion of healthcare infrastructure.
Right.
We're talking about building state-of-the-art hospitals, yes. But more importantly, it's about pushing primary care clinics out into rural and underserved communities.
Getting the care to the people who actually need it.
Exactly. It's about aggressive disease prevention programs, childhood immunization campaigns that reach near universal coverage, and just drastic improvements in sanitation and clean water access.
So you're fundamentally changing the baseline survivability of everyday life.
You really are.
Okay, so the population is living significantly longer, healthier lives. What about the education engine?
The education sector saw an equally dramatic transformation. And we measure this through what's called expected years of schooling.
Okay, and what did that look like in 1990?
Back in 1990, a child entering the Jordanian educational system could expect to complete about 11.4 years of schooling.
So roughly finishing high school, more or less.
Right, but by 2023, that number rose to 13.1 years.
Okay, so we're looking at an additional year and a half of formal education across the board. What does that actually represent in terms of a person's life trajectory?
It basically represents the normalization of higher education.
I see.
Yeah, moving from 11.4 to 13.1 years means that the average expectation has shifted from simply finishing basic secondary school to actually entering tertiary education.
Like university, vocational training, or advanced technical colleges.
Exactly. The state essentially guaranteed that the baseline knowledge of its citizenry would be significantly higher.
So health is soaring. The population is living to nearly 78. Education is soaring. People are going to college. It sounds like an absolute utopia.
It does on paper.
But here's the catch we teased at the very beginning of the deep dive, and it is a fascinatingly painful one. Despite these massive internal gains, this 21.8% absolute growth, Jordan's global rank actually slipped.
Yes, this is what economists refer to as the sliding rank phenomenon.
Right.
And it is crucial to understand if we want to diagnose what's happening here.
Because back in 1990, with their lower scores, Jordan was ranked 82nd in the world for human development.
Right.
But by 2023, despite being so much healthier, despite being so much more educated, they fell to rank 105.
Because human development is not a solo time trial where you are just trying to beat your personal best. It is a global race.
That is exactly how I was visualizing it. It's like being on a treadmill at the gym.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. You've been jogging at a decent pace, and then you decide to really push yourself. You increase your running speed by 20%. You're sweating. You're putting in the work. Your heart rate is fantastic. You feel great.
Or do better than you've ever done.
Yeah, exactly. But what you don't realize is that someone else controls the speed of the treadmill belt, and they just keep cranking it up. So even though you're running faster than you ever have in your life, slowly, agonizingly, you are drifting toward the back of the machine.
You are losing ground. That is a perfect analogy. Jordan is running faster, but the rest of the world, specifically the global south and various emerging economies, has accelerated at a just breathtaking pace over the last 30 years.
So if health and education are the legs powering their run on this treadmill, why are they drifting backward? What is the third engine doing?
The third engine. The third engine is income, specifically gross national income, or GNI, per capita.
Okay.
And while the health and education engines are roaring, the income engine is, well, it's sputtering. By 2023, Jordan's GNI per capita sits at a modest $9,222.
And that's adjusted for purchasing power parity, right?
Yes, exactly. In 2021 PPP dollars.
So how does that compare to the countries that are sprinting past them on the treadmill?
It pales in comparison, honestly. It pales in comparison to the explosive income growth we've seen in parts of Asia, Eastern Europe, and Latin America over the same 30 years.
Right, because those countries really scaled up.
They did. Many of these emerging economies figured out how to translate their modest gains in health and education into massive leaps in economic productivity and export power.
But Jordan didn't quite make that leap.
Right. Jordan's income growth, relatively speaking, has been stagnant. The economic return on their massive social development investments simply hasn't materialized at the same scale.
So if their gross national income is lagging so heavily behind their peers, the natural assumption, if we go back to our predictive models, is that the infrastructure on the ground must be crumbling.
That's what you'd think.
Right. You would assume that whatever wealth they do have is probably being hoarded by a tiny elite, and the rest of the country is just fighting over scraps.
But that leads us to the next massive surprise in this data.
Exactly. Because to understand why the income is lagging, we can't just look at the missing money. We actually have to look at what Jordan is getting surprisingly, incredibly, right behind the scenes.
Yes, because the foundation they've built is entirely counterintuitive to a struggling economy.
And this is where the data gets genuinely uplifting before it gets confusing again. We need to introduce a new metric here, something called the Inequality-Adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
Right. So the standard HDI we've been discussing gives us the national average.
Yeah.
But as any statistician will tell you, averages can be incredibly deceptive.
Oh, completely. You can have a room with 10 billionaires and 1,000 people living in cardboard boxes, and the average wealth of that room looks fantastic.
Precisely. If the healthcare gains are only happening in a few wealthy neighborhoods in the capital city, the average goes up. But the country as a whole isn't actually developing.
So the IHDI was created to fix that blind spot.
Exactly. It takes the standard HDI score and mathematically discounts it based on how unequally those health, education, and income achievements are distributed across the population.
It essentially asks, is this development reaching everyone or just a privileged few?
Yes. The greater the inequality in a society, the more the HDI score drops. And we call this drop the inequality loss.
Okay, I'm following. So looking at the 2023 data, Jordan's standard average HDI is 0.754, but their inequality-adjusted HDI drops to 0.637,
Right.
which represents an inequality loss of roughly 15.5%.
Now, in a vacuum, losing 15.5% of your development score to inequality might sound like a significant failure.
Sure, nobody wants to lose 15%.
But context is everything in global data.
What is the global baseline?
The global average inequality loss across all nations is 22.0%.
Wow, so Jordan is significantly outperforming the world average when it comes to equality of distribution.
They are drastically outperforming it. And if we zoom in on the education dimensions specifically, the success is even more pronounced.
Let's hear it.
Jordan's inequality loss in education is a mere 12.9%.
Compared to what?
The global average for education inequality loss is a staggering 21.4%.
Wait, 12.9% versus 21.4%. That is a massive difference. What does an education inequality loss of only 12.9% actually look like in practice? How do they achieve that?
It tells a fascinating story about state priorities. It means that access to a quality classroom is not heavily gatekept by class, wealth, or regional divides.
So it's not just the elite getting the good schools.
Exactly. In many developing nations, if you live in the capital, you get a world-class education. But if you live in a rural farming village, you might not even have a school with a roof, let alone a qualified teacher.
Right, the urban-rural divide.
But Jordan has managed to deploy its educational infrastructure with surprising equity. The state has basically ensured a relatively level playing field for basic human capital development, regardless of your zip code.
So we have a society that is highly egalitarian in providing basic social services. But there's another hidden triumph in this foundation, and it has to do with something that is dominating global conversations right now: the environment.
Yes, we definitely need to talk about the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, or the PHDI. This is a relatively new metric, but it is becoming one of the most vital lenses through which we view development.
Right, because historically, the fastest way to grow your economy and boost your HDI was to just burn as much coal and oil as possible, chop down all your forests, and build massive polluting factories.
Exactly. The traditional HDI rewarded countries for getting rich, but it completely ignored the ecological cost of that wealth.
Which is obviously a huge problem.
So the PHDI adjusts the Human Development Score based on a country's carbon dioxide emissions and its material footprint per capita. It poses a fundamental ethical question.
Which is, are you achieving your high human development by destroying the planet for future generations?
Precisely.
And Jordan's data here is absolutely phenomenal. On the environmental front, they're essentially a low-carbon powerhouse. Let's look at the carbon footprint. Their per capita CO2 emissions are only 1.7 tons.
To put that 1.7 tons in perspective, the global average is 4.54 tons per person.
Wait, so Jordan is emitting nearly a third of the global average?
Yep, a third.
But how are they managing that? I mean, are they just lacking heavy industry, or is it a conscious policy choice?
It's actually a mix of both, but increasingly it is a conscious pivot towards sustainable energy and resource management.
Okay.
They have a relatively small industrial base compared to massive manufacturing hubs, which naturally keeps emissions lower. But they have also been highly strategic about integrating renewable energy sources and maintaining a low material footprint.
So they aren't just consuming raw materials at a hyper-destructive rate to fuel their growth.
Exactly. They're growing smarter.
And here is the payoff for that. When you adjust Jordan's HDI for these planetary pressures, they experience a penalty, a loss of only 5.3%,
Right.
while the global average loss for planetary pressure is 10.1%. So because Jordan's carbon footprint is so incredibly low, when you rank the world by the PHDI, meaning when you actively penalize the heavy polluters and reward the green economies, Jordan's global rank violently leaps upward.
It is an earthquake of a shift. They jump up 26 places in the international rankings.
26 places.
Yes, they shoot from rank 105 in standard HDI up to rank 79 globally when you factor in ecological sustainability.
That is a staggering jump. So let's synthesize this structural foundation for everyone listening, because if you just look at this raw data without knowing the name of the country, it looks like a utopian blueprint for the 21st century.
It really does.
You have a highly educated population, you have a state that distributes that education and healthcare with incredible fairness, minimizing inequality, and they are achieving all of this while keeping their carbon footprint at a third of the global average.
It is the dream foundation. I mean, economists and sociologists spend their entire careers trying to design theoretical models that look exactly like Jordan's baseline data. You have an educated, healthy population that lives sustainably and treats its citizens equitably.
Which brings us crashing right back into the paradox.
Yeah.
If the ship is built this well, if the hull is this strong and the engines are this green, where is the massive leak?
Yeah, why is the income lagging?
Right. Why are they sitting at rank 105 in standard HDI?
To find the leak, we have to pull out a statistical microscope. We really have to look past the broad strokes of success and zoom into the absolute margins of their poverty data.
We have to explore what we are calling the invisible poverty.
Exactly.
Okay, let's go back to that number we introduced at the very beginning. That staggering multi-dimensional poverty index rank of 2 with a score of 0.003.
So we need to define what multidimensional actually means here, because it's not just about how much money is in your bank account.
Right. Poverty is more than just income.
Exactly. The MPI recognizes that poverty is an experience of multiple overlapping deprivations. It measures things like, does your home have a dirt floor? Do you lack access to clean cooking fuel? Is there severe child malnutrition? Do you have basic electricity?
So when a country has an MPI score of 0.003, it means that those compounding visceral experiences of poverty have statistically vanished. People are not living on dirt floors without electricity.
Precisely. Broad systemic poverty has been eradicated. But the MPI also measures educational deprivations.
Oh.
And if we take that tiny microscopic sliver of remaining poverty in Jordan, that 0.0003, and we decompose it.
We break it apart to see what is causing that final fraction of a percent.
Right. When we do that, a glaring red flag emerges.
And it is a fascinating red flag. School attendance accounts for 40.5% of the remaining multidimensional poverty burden.
Yes. Nearly half of the remaining multidimensional poverty in the entire nation is driven by a single indicator, kids not being in the classroom.
Okay, I have to stop you there because that makes absolutely no sense based on what we just discussed.
I know, it sounds impossible.
We just established that education access is highly equal, their inequality loss in education is only 12.9%, and their expected schooling is over 13 years.
Right.
The state has built schools everywhere. How can school attendance simultaneously be their biggest remaining poverty driver?
It's a brilliant contradiction, and understanding it is the key to unlocking the entire paradox of Jordan's development. It forces us to ask, what happens at the absolute margins of a successful society?
So if the state has built the schools and made them accessible, what is keeping that tiny fraction of children out?
What this specific data point suggests is that the educational system works brilliantly for 99% of the population. But when poverty is almost entirely eradicated, the poverty that remains is incredibly stubborn, hyperspecific, and deeply complex.
So it's no longer a problem of lacking a school building.
Exactly. It's about highly marginalized segments of the population. We're talking about perhaps nomadic communities, extreme rural isolation, specific refugee demographics, or families dealing with complex internal crises where children are forced to labor despite the state's provisions.
Wow. So it's not a failure of infrastructure, it's the sheer difficulty of reaching that final mile.
The final mile is always the hardest.
Oh.
But the larger takeaway here, the massive pivot we need to make to understand why this country is struggling economically despite all these triumphs, is this. The educational system as a whole is a monumental triumph.
Right.
It works incredibly well. It works exceptionally well for women. But the crisis isn't happening in the classroom.
It's happening outside of it.
The crisis is happening the moment they leave it.
And that leads us right into the Achilles heel of Jordan's development. We're going to explore what we are calling the inverted miracle of female education.
It is time to drop the hammer and look closely at the Gender Development Index, the GDI.
Remind us how the GDI functions mathematically.
Sure. The GDI measures gender gaps in human development achievements by accounting for disparities between women and men in those exact same three basic dimensions: health, knowledge, and living standards.
So it splits them up.
Exactly. It essentially creates a separate HDI score for men and a separate HDI score for women and compares them.
And Jordan's overall GDI value is 0.861. As we established at the top of the deep dive, that places them at rank 178 out of 194 tracked countries.
To see the gap clearly, you have to look at those split scores. The male HDI in Jordan is 0.787.
Which is solid, robust, growing.
Yes, but the female HDI is only 0.677.
That is a massive 14% gap between men and women in overall human development.
Now, in the standard global development narrative, when you see a 14% gap and a rank of 178, you instantly assume you know the cause.
You'd expect to see horrific health outcomes for women, right? Sky-high mortality rates, millions of girls being denied basic schooling.
Exactly. That is the traditional anatomy of a low GDI rank.
But Jordan completely shatters that narrative mold. Let's look closely at the health data for women in Jordan because it is nothing short of a stunning victory. I was looking through the notes before we started, and the maternal health data really stood out to me, but I couldn't quite wrap my head around the scale of the change.
The scale is massive, and it speaks directly to the quality of their public health initiatives. If you look at the maternal mortality ratio, or MMR,
which measures deaths per 100,000 live births.
Correct. In 1990, Jordan's MMR was 81.7.
Which was actually better than many developing nations at the time, but obviously still a serious concern for public health officials.
Right. But by 2023, through focused, relentless policy, that number plummeted to 41.3.
They basically cut maternal deaths in half.
They did.
Okay, so what does cutting maternal mortality in half actually require on the ground? You don't just achieve that by wishing for it.
No, it requires a massive logistical and cultural mobilization. It means building specialized maternal wards in rural areas so women don't have to travel hours while in labor.
Which is life-saving.
Absolutely. It means training thousands of specialized midwives and obstetricians. It means creating a cultural shift where prenatal care becomes a standard, expected part of every pregnancy rather than just an emergency intervention when things go wrong.
So the state heavily subsidized and prioritized the physical survival and health of mothers.
Yes, exactly.
And it goes beyond just surviving childbirth. Let's look at the adolescent birth rate, the ABR, which measures births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19.
This is a critical metric for bodily autonomy.
Right.
Back in 1990, the ABR was 54.9. By 2023, it dropped to an astonishingly low 18.4.
To give you context for how incredible that is, the global average for the adolescent birth rate is 39.1. So Jordan is vastly, overwhelmingly outperforming the world average.
So what does this all mean for the women of Jordan? Let's synthesize this health data.
Please.
It means they have tremendous bodily autonomy, they have excellent access to reproductive health care and family planning, they are not being forced into early, dangerous motherhood.
They're surviving childbirth at highly elevated rates, and their overall life expectancy has soared.
Exactly. Their biological and physical human capital is highly protected by the state.
And then they take that protected health, they take that autonomy, and they go to school.
Yes. And the education data is just as mind-blowing as the health data. In 2023, 73.75% of Jordanian women have at least some secondary education.
Let's just pause and emphasize that. Nearly 74% of the adult female population has secondary education.
Right.
The global female average is only 62.0%. Jordanian women are absolutely smashing the global average for educational attainment.
Now, for total transparency, the male secondary education rate in Jordan is 85.7%, so there's still a small gap there.
Sure.
But the absolute level for women, nearly three-quarters of the population, is phenomenally high for any developing nation.
This is exactly why we are calling it the inverted miracle.
It really is an inversion.
Because if you look at the typical playbook for global development, the absolute hardest things to achieve are educating girls and keeping mothers alive.
Yes, those are massive hurdles. Overcoming traditional patriarchal biases against girls in classrooms, funding rural maternal wards, convincing families that a daughter's education is worth the investment. These are incredibly difficult, expensive, deeply cultural challenges that usually take a century to overcome.
But Jordan has completely solved the supply side of female human capital. They've successfully built an army of highly educated, physically healthy women who possess reproductive autonomy and long life expectancies.
They did the hard part.
They really did. I was trying to think of an analogy for this, and it sounds to me like a massive manufacturing plant.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine you have this country-sized factory, and for 30 years they've poured billions of dollars, immense focus, and incredible talent into refining the most high-grade, premium aerospace titanium.
Okay.
They've perfected the refinement process, that is the education and health system. They have the best raw material in the world.
Right.
But then you look at the factory floor, and there's absolutely no assembly line to actually build the airplane. They just refine the titanium, polish it to perfection, and then stack it in a dark warehouse.
Oh, wow. That is a brutally accurate way to describe the human capital pipeline in Jordan right now.
It's just sitting there.
The raw potential is refined to perfection, and then it is completely warehoused.
Which brings us back to the core paradox. If they have this army of highly educated, healthy women, this premium titanium, why is the female HDI only 0.677? Why are they ranked 178th in the world for gender development?
Where is the assembly line breaking down?
Exactly.
We have to ask the million-dollar question. We have a massive population of healthy, educated women. Where are they during the workday?
And this brings us to what we are calling the fortress economy, the missing workforce.
Prepare yourself, because these numbers are devastating, and they are the anchor dragging down the entire nation's statistical profile. We need to look at the labor force participation rate.
Just to be clear for everyone listening, we aren't just talking about who currently has a job. The labor force participation rate measures the percentage of the working age population that is either actively working or actively looking for work.
Right, so if you've given up or if you're legally or culturally barred from working, you drop out of this metric entirely.
Okay, hit us with the numbers.
In 2023, the male labor force participation rate in Jordan is 60.5%.
Okay, that's a relatively normal, healthy number for a transitioning economy of this size.
It is, but the female labor force participation rate, is an abysmal 13.75%.
13.75%.
Let that sink in for a moment.
I mean, the global female average is roughly 48.5%.
Yeah.
Jordan is sitting at 13.75%.
Yes.
Only about 1 in 7 working-age women are participating in the formal economy.
This single data point is the black hole in Jordan's data.
It sucks everything in.
It really does. This is the glaring, undeniable reason Jordan sits at the bottom of the global GDI rankings, and it's the reason their overall gross national income is stagnating.
Because you can have the most educated, healthy female population on Earth, but if they are entirely excluded from generating income, their specific HDI collapses.
And the GDI rank plummets, and the national economy essentially runs on half power.
The economic conversion rate of their incredible female education system is practically zero.
Practically zero.
They are pouring resources, state funds, time, and brilliant teaching into young women, and the economy is reaping none of the rewards. So as the analyst here, I have to ask you, what are the actual mechanics of this?
How does it happen?
Yeah. Is it a legal issue? Are there laws explicitly saying women can't work?
It is rarely that explicit. You don't usually find a law that simply says women cannot be employed. Instead, it's a complex web of systemic friction points.
Invisible walls.
Exactly. Invisible walls that make employment so difficult, so culturally taxing, or so logistically impossible that women with master's degrees simply opt out or are forced out.
Walk me through some of these invisible walls. What does this friction look like on a Tuesday morning for a young woman in Amman who just got her degree?
Let's start with logistics. Public transportation.
Okay.
In many parts of the world, public transit is the great equalizer. But if the public transportation infrastructure is unreliable, or, more importantly, if it is culturally or physically unsafe for a woman to commute alone.
That immediately limits her job prospects.
Exactly. It limits her to whatever is within a brief walking distance of her home, or whatever her male relatives can drive her to.
So if she gets a great job offer across the city but has no safe way to get there, she has to decline.
She has no choice.
So lack of female-friendly infrastructure is a massive barrier. What about the workplace itself?
Then you have the burden of unpaid care work. There is a deep prevailing cultural expectation that a woman's primary overriding role is domestic.
Caring for children and elderly parents.
Right. And the legal frameworks often reinforce this rather than alleviate it.
How so?
Well, if the state does not mandate flexible working hours, or if there is a complete lack of subsidized high-quality childcare, a woman is forced to choose.
And given the cultural pressures, she will almost always be forced to choose the home.
Exactly. Furthermore, there's a severe mismatch in the job market itself.
A mismatch between the degrees they're getting and the jobs available.
Exactly that. Historically, women in Jordan who did work preferred the public sector teaching, government administration, healthcare.
Why the public sector?
The public sector offered better hours, more security, and a more culturally acceptable environment. But as the government tries to balance its budget, public sector hiring has shrunk dramatically.
Leaving only the private sector.
Right. And the private sector in Jordan is incredibly demanding.
Like long hours.
Long, inflexible hours. It has fewer protections for maternity leave, and employer bias is rampant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Many private employers simply assume a woman will quit the moment she gets married or has a child, so they don't hire her in the first place, where they pay her significantly less.
So you have a highly educated woman facing unsafe transit, lack of childcare, cultural pressure from her family, and a hostile private sector.
At a certain point, the friction is just too high. She stays home.
It is a fortress keeping them out.
It really is.
And what's fascinating and honestly deeply troubling is that this economic exclusion isn't just happening at the entry-level or mid-level job market. It goes all the way up to the highest halls of power.
Yes, to truly understand why these invisible walls haven't been torn down, we have to look at the political context.
We need to look at the data on political glass ceilings. Let's look at the statistics on parliamentary seats held by women in Jordan.
In 1990, women held just 1.67% of parliamentary seats.
It was almost non-existent. Total male domination of the legislative process.
Now, by 2023, that number grew to 13.33%.
Okay, so a casual observer might look at that and say, hey, that's an 8x increase. That is massive progress.
And it is progress, but we have to look at the absolute power dynamics.
Right. The political decision-making remains entirely lopsided. The parliament is still heavily skewed toward men, who hold roughly 86.67% of the seats.
And again, context is key here. The global average for parliamentary seats held by women is roughly 26.5%.
So Jordan's 13.33% remains severely below the global norm.
This is the feedback loop of the fortress economy. The women are shut out of the workforce, and they're simultaneously shut out of the legislative bodies that could potentially pass the laws needed to get them into the workforce.
If Parliament is 86% male, passing aggressive legislation for subsidized childcare, equal pay, or female-centric transit infrastructure is rarely going to be the top legislative priority.
The decision-making power to change the structure is held entirely by the demographic that doesn't experience the friction of the structure.
It's exactly like our titanium factory analogy.
Absolutely.
The engineers running the factory don't see a problem with just stacking the titanium in the warehouse because they aren't the ones being stacked.
Precisely. The disconnect reveals something vital. The barrier to female employment in Jordan is clearly, undeniably not a lack of capability.
No, they have the capability. They have the secondary and tertiary degrees.
The barrier is entirely structural.
Okay, we need to synthesize all of this. We've covered a massive amount of ground, from carbon emissions to maternal wards. We need to bring all these disparate threads together into a conclusive, logical chain.
Let's map out what we can call the advantage chain that Jordan has built over the last 30 years. It is formidable.
Okay, walk me through the links in the chain.
First link, high education levels, especially for women. Second link, the near-total eradication of extreme multidimensional poverty.
Right, the .003 MPI.
Third link, low inequality loss in basic services, meaning the wealth they have is shared fairly. Fourth link, low environmental planetary pressure, meaning they are primed for a green future.
That is a chain of data that should logically be pulling a country straight into the top 50 of global human development. It should be an economic powerhouse.
But there's a breaking point.
The 13.75% female labor force participation rate?
Yes. The chain violently snaps exactly when it tries to translate female human capital into economic capital.
And this brings us to the core takeaway from the source report we've been analyzing. This is the big aha moment for policymakers.
Jordan's future evolution as a nation, its ability to increase its gross national income, to stop sliding down the HDI treadmill, does not depend on increasing the quantity of education anymore.
They don't need to build more schools.
No.
They don't need to push for 14 or 15 expected years of schooling. That well is tapped.
Right. The return on investment for simply adding more years of general education is diminishing. Their future depends entirely on what the economic analysts are calling debarrierization.
Debarrierization, removing the social, structural, and legal barriers to women working, dismantling the invisible walls.
Exactly. So what does the path forward actually look like? Based on the totality of this data, there are 3 actionable macro-strategic pillars for Jordan to unlock its dormant potential.
Let's explore those pillars. What is the paramount priority?
Pillar 1 is close the GDI gap. This is the silver bullet.
So how do they do that?
If Jordan can implement aggressive, targeted policies, subsidized state childcare, heavily regulated safe transportation networks, strict anti-discrimination laws in private hiring, and massive cultural campaigns normalizing female executives.
Right, pulling that female employment rate from 13.75% closer to the global average of 48.5%.
If they do that, the GDI ranking will skyrocket from 178.
And because income is the sole lagging engine of their overall HDI, injecting millions of highly educated women into the workforce will multiply the gross national income.
It will pull the entire national HDI ranking up with it. It's the ultimate economic stimulus package, and the workers are already trained and waiting.
Exactly. Okay, so what is the second pillar?
Pillar number 2 is leverage the PHDI. Jordan needs to capitalize on that incredible 26th place rank jump in the planetary HDI.
Right, their incredibly low carbon footprint of 1.7 tons.
In a modern global economy that is increasingly desperate for sustainable, ESG-friendly investment opportunities, Jordan is a glowing beacon.
They need to market themselves internationally as a premier destination for global green investments.
Exactly. The challenge and the key is to maintain that low carbon emission profile while growing the economy. As those women enter the workforce and the GNI rises, they cannot afford to let their ecological footprint explode.
They need to prove to the world that you can grow wealthy without getting dirty. And what is the final pillar?
Pillar 3, target the last mile of poverty. We have to remember that Tiny 0.003 MPI score.
The invisible poverty, driven 40.5% by school attendance.
Right. They need to shift from broad, sweeping national education campaigns to highly targeted, laser-focused social work.
So no more blanketing the country with new schools.
Exactly.
Got
It's
it.
about finding out exactly which specific communities, which isolated households are keeping kids out of school and providing bespoke micro-interventions for them.
Maybe it's a cash transfer program for a specific nomadic group or localized transport for an isolated valley.
You fix the final fraction of a percent with scalpel policies, not broadswords.
You know, we've spent this entire hour deep in the macro data of a specific nation in the Middle East, but as I'm listening to this, I can't help but think about how universal this concept is.
It really is.
Think about your own workplace, your own industry, or your own community right now. How much latent talent is sitting on the sidelines because of structural barriers rather than a lack of skill?
That's the real question.
Jordan is a massive, fascinating macro example of a micro problem we see everywhere, every single day. We look at people who aren't succeeding, whether it's a marginalized group in tech or working mothers trying to get to the C-suite, and we falsely assume they just lack the education or the drive.
When in reality, they might just be fully capable engines trapped in a garage without the keys.
That is the perfect distillation of the data.
We have this pervasive, almost mythological belief in the modern world that education naturally, inevitably, leads to economic empowerment.
It's the great promise we make to children. Go to school, study hard, and you will get a good job.
But Jordan's data proves mathematically that knowledge without structural opportunity is just a locked door.
Yeah.
It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. In our own lives, in our own societies, are we focused far too much on gathering qualifications and not nearly enough on breaking down the doors to actually use them?
That is exactly the thought I want to leave you with today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The 86% of untapped female potential in Jordan, like massively educated, missing workforce, it isn't just a depressing statistic. When you really understand the data, you realize it is the blueprint for the country's next golden age. The titanium is refined. The engine is built. It is fully charged. Now they just need to build the assembly line and turn the key